First off, hello to all of you and welcome. I know many of you, but for those who I don't know, my name's Katie Erickson. I'm the Ingram Director of Education here at the Carlos Museum. Tonight, we're pleased to present to you our annual Laszlo-Excalibur Lecture, and this endowment was established through the generosity of Dr. John Laszlo's family and friends in honor of his retirement from the American Cancer Society. Every year, it enables us to bring phenomenal scholars, artists, and others who have scholarship and contributions expanding our understanding of the ancient classical world. Dr. Laszlo and Pat, thank you both for making this a highlight of every year. We're also pleased to note that this year's Laszlo Lecture is the keynote address for the colloquium Classical Drapery and Dress Reform, with 3 more sessions following tomorrow beginning at 10 a.m. I hope to see many more of your lovely faces there. And we hope, again, that you'll join us then as well. I would like to now welcome our curator for Greek and Roman art, Dr. Ruth Allen, to the stage.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to speak incredibly briefly. It is my absolute delight to welcome Dr. Mireille as our Laszlo-Excalibur lecturer this year. It's always a pleasure to see you, John and Pat. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for all that you do for this museum. We are much better off for your support and for your love of our collection and our museum. And it's wonderful that you have enabled us to bring Mireille to Atlanta today. Someone whose work I've admired for a long time, but who I've only now been able to meet today. Mireille is currently the executive director of the Foundation for Ethical Stewardship of Cultural Heritage, which is a brand new initiative that is sure to do much important work that I'm incredibly excited to hear has just received significant funding and is launching sort of as of now. So congratulations. Formerly, Mireille was a consulting scholar for the Penn Cultural Heritage Center and assistant professor with the Departments of History of Art and Classical Studies at Vanderbilt University. She holds her degrees from Bryn Mawr and Occidental College, and her research interests are Greek art and archaeology, and in particular the construction of gender in ancient visual and material culture. She has published widely on the social functions of dress in ancient Greece, including her volume on body, dress, and identity in ancient Greece, published in 2015. For her lecture with us tonight, entitled The Tanagras, Greek Dress, and Femininity, Mireille will discuss the particular importance of dress for women and for girls and relate ancient practices to modern fashions of the late 19th century, giving us a grounding in the ancient context and the ancient objects that were the inspiration for Whistler and for so many other artists of the 19th century, and that are the core of our exhibition just the other side of the hallway, which I hope you will take the opportunity to see if you haven't done so already. Mireille, we're delighted to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I am really delighted to be here. Before I begin my talk, I wanted to acknowledge the recent restitutions of objects from the Carlos Museum to Greece, and prior to that, to Italy and Iraq. These are positive responses to current debates over the antiquities market and the responsibilities of museums to the so-called source countries. I'd also like to point out that the Recasting Antiquities exhibition is a wonderful illustration of the value of loans rather than purchases to bring exceptional objects to the public. In my current role as Executive Director of the Foundation for Ethical Stewardship of Cultural Heritage, I work with other academics and museum professionals to create standards for provenance research and to train the next generation of provenance researchers. Our inaugural project, the Mediterranean Antiquities Provenance Research Alliance, was recently awarded a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities that will fund our work for the next 3 years. And I very much hope to be able to work with the fabulous staff here at the Carlos as we develop that project. But now on to my talk. It is truly an honor to have been invited as the Laszlo-Excalibur Lecturer in conjunction with Recasting Antiquity and tomorrow's colloquium on classical drapery and dress reform. These are topics that are close to my heart, and I'm delighted to be part of what promises to be a lively discussion. When I first began my study of ancient dress practices as an undergraduate over 30 years ago, it was a rather lonely pursuit. Few scholars took the subject seriously. It was considered merely fashion and not worthy of academic scrutiny. Thankfully, things have changed, and rather dramatically. Although it took a while for classicists to recognize the interesting and important work on dress in other fields, such as art history, anthropology, sociology, and psychology, the study of ancient dress is now a vital and respected subfield within our discipline. But perhaps more importantly, this seemingly superficial subject now serves as a meaningful conduit between the ancient world and our modern one. So what changed? Dress theory. Dress theory is based on the assertion that dress must be understood in conjunction with the body. Dress is defined as an assemblage of modifications to the body and or supplements to the body. And more specifically, the dress person is a gestalt that includes body, all direct modifications to the body itself, and all three-dimensional supplements added to it. This definition is applicable to the dress of any individual in any culture, now or in the past, without judgment or bias. What ties it all together is the centrality of the body. We all have bodies, or our bodies, and we all engage in dress practices, whether conscious or not. And so did the ancients. Dress is one of few human universals. And, I would argue, the study of dress provides a unique and essential understanding of the lived experience of the ancient Greeks, especially women, that is otherwise inaccessible. Of course, it was the seeming familiarity of the Tanagras that made them such a sensation when they appeared in large numbers in the 1870s, discovered by accident by a Boeotian farmer and subsequently looted by the thousands. Most of the Tanagras in the Recasting Antiquity exhibition were purchased for the Louvre during this time and have been subjected to scientific analysis to confirm their antiquity. But the Tanagras caused such a sensation in Paris among the emerging bourgeoisie. They created an unprecedented demand, leading to the mass production of fakes and forgeries, which are also addressed in this exhibition. What was it about these objects that made them so appealing to collectors? Certainly, their small size and mundane materials made them both affordable and easy to display on a mantle or sideboard. Unlike the large-scale marble sculptures favored by earlier generations of aristocratic collectors. But the real appeal was that they seemed to depict actual people, and especially women engaged in everyday activities, wearing garments and accessories that recalled those of modern Parisiennes. The preserved polychromy reflected the colors, if not the cut and sewn tailoring of 19th century fashions, and the gilding highlighted their elegant jewelry. The Tanagras displayed similar accessories such as elegant footwear and handheld fans, and they even engaged in similar practices of body modification, including bound hairstyles and the judicious use of cosmetics. In short, the Tanagras were Parisians, and the Parisians Tanagras. We will learn tomorrow about the profound influence of ancient Greek dress on modern fashion. But what can ancient Greek dress tell us about ancient Greece, especially ancient Greek women, who are the primary subjects of the Tanagras? If we can get past the apparent modernity of the Tanagras, they have quite a lot to tell us about women's lives in ancient Greece, about their lived experience, as well as the feminine ideal. The small statuettes we call Tanagras are a variety of mold-made terracottas that were produced in large numbers throughout the ancient Greek world during the Hellenistic period, roughly the 3rd to the 1st centuries BCE. The name Tanagra refers to the town in Boeotia, to the north and east of Athens, from which thousands of examples were recovered in the 1870s. But in fact, similar objects have been found throughout the Greek world, including Athens and Corinth, as well as cities on the coast of Asia Minor, in what is now Turkey. Nevertheless, the term Tanagra has been generally applied to them all. The fact that they are mold-made means that the Tanagras replicate similar subjects, poses, gestures, and garments. Details would have been added, modeled, or incised on the hardened clay figure prior to firing. The painted polychromy was added after firing, as illustrated in this 1893 painting, The Antique Pottery Painter, by Jean-Léon Gérôme. Gérôme imagines the potter's workshop as a distinctly feminine space in which women produce, sell, and purchase images that look just like them. Current scholarship suggests that this scenario might in fact reflect reality, that women were both producers and consumers of Tanagras. The vast majority of Tanagras represent ideal women dressed in their Sunday best. If the Tanagras were in fact produced by women, they might give us particular insight into details of ancient Greek dress and women's experience that are not available from other media. The vast majority of Tanagra figurines depict women in fine clothes that envelop their bodies in multiple layers of fabric. Since women were the primary producers of textiles, clothing was an important means of displaying one's own skill in spinning and weaving. Alternatively, an imported luxury fabric such as Cohen silk indicated special purchasing power, as did expensive dyes such as Murex purple. We have a few precious fragments of textiles that have preserved archaeologically, and I apologize for the quality of this image. It was the best I could do. This is a fragment of linen. This was the first classical fabric that was found archaeologically in the 1950s in a grave near Koropi, near Athens. And it's woven linen with embroidery on it, which shocked everyone because they thought the Greeks didn't practice embroidery. And you can see that there are these sort of diamond patterns here, and in the center, there is an embroidered line. Take my word for it. I think it doesn't mean that. The embroidery is done in gold and silver thread. So it looks like what we have here is an imported textile because of the embroidery technique that is not a distinctly Greek technique. And we also have evidence for the use of gold and silver in textile production, and I'll talk more about that later on. Most women wear at least two visible garments. The primary garment, called the chiton, which was made of linen and extended to the feet, and the hemation, that was made of wool and wrapped around the body like a cloak. I'm going to point out these details on the modern cast because they haven't been worn away as they have with many of the ancient examples. So I'll point out here at the top, you can see that there are some very thin, sort of creeply folds to her garment. They're sort of bunched up underneath her armpit. And that is the linen chiton that is then hidden behind the woolen hemation and extends down below at her feet. And then the hemation, you can see that the artist has deliberately shown that it's made of a thicker material, a less diaphanous material that we see with the chiton, and instead it falls in these beautiful, elegant draperied folds. She's carrying the chiton, the hemation over her arm, but we'll see that there are lots of different ways to wear this otherwise very plain garment. Some options for the draping of the hemation. Some women wear it pulled over the top of the head so that it's like a hood. This is an example from the exhibition here. A very few wind it around the head and the face, veiling the face. So in this case, you can see that only her eyes are visible. We also have one example in the exhibition of a separate face veil, and I'll show you, and I'll point that out when we get to it later on. We should understand these figures, these fully draped figures, these figures that are enveloped in cloth, as being in a public space, a proper woman veiled in the company of strangers. But with family and friends, the hemation could be pushed back over the shoulders or even removed completely. It all depended on social context. A woman's hemation was completely malleable, allowing the wearer to reveal or conceal herself in whole or in part, suggesting a degree of personal agency. The fully draped Tanagras should probably be understood as women en route to a religious sanctuary, perhaps as part of a ritual procession. Some bring votive objects, such as this floral garland, right here, to dedicate to the divinity. But some also would have brought statuettes just like this one, to leave in the sanctuary as a reminder of their visit, and to remain in the presence of the deity. So it's all very meta. But the real message communicated by the Tanagras is a woman's cosmos. The word cosmos, meaning order, had to do with one's personal appearance, reflecting the larger order of things. And so the Tanagras show women in all their finery, with carefully arranged hairstyles, judiciously applied cosmetics, elegant jewelry, and fine accessories such as shoes, hats, and fans, to show their elite status and therefore their cosmos. And of course, it was these details that were so attractive to the 19th century Parisienne. Proper women in ancient Greece had long hair that was bound up in some way. Because hair was associated with sexuality, a proper hairstyle communicated that the woman's sexuality, and therefore her fertility, were contained within marriage. The most common style was a low bun, like the French chignon, which could be tied with a ribbon or a sash, or with a hairnet called the kekrophalos. This is what it looks like on the front. I have a detail of the back. So her hair sort of peeks out the top in this example. Exceptionally fine examples of these hairnets survive archaeologically, such as this gold example with a medallion depicting the goddess Artemis. We don't know the find context for this object. It probably came from a grave. So this is demonstrating a problem that we have with the study of ancient Greek dress when we look at real objects like this. Is this an object that was used during life? Or was it made specifically for the grave? And we don't know. Another popular hairstyle in this period is what we call a melon coiffure, for obvious reasons. It isn't clear how it was achieved, but it seems to have been something like modern cornrows. This woman displays rather prominent earrings, as do most of the figures whose heads are uncovered. Because of the small scale of the figurines, the earrings are usually represented as simple discs without much detail. On the other hand, it's quite likely that jewelry was originally picked out with paint or even gilding, as we see on the celebrated Lady in Blue, whose elegant himation displays a wide gold border. And remember, we saw the use of gold and silver thread in the embroidered textile that we saw earlier. So this isn't pure fantasy. Although the jewelry worn by the Tanagras is rather plain, examples of actual earrings, necklaces, and bracelets preserved archaeologically can be extraordinarily elaborate, made of gold and other precious metals and set with colorful gemstones. Certainly such jewels reflected the wealth of the wearer, but ancient Greek jewelry communicated a more complex message. Because jewelry was part of the woman's trousseau that she brought with her upon marriage, it generally reflected the wealth of her natal family, not that of her husband. And unlike the dowry, which was transferred to the husband, the trousseau remained the property of the wife. In this way, a woman's jewelry was a kind of insurance policy in the event of the dissolution of the marriage or the death of her husband. And indeed, we have written evidence for the pawning of jewelry in times of duress. And this is in the form of some receipts from a pawn shop that were written on papyrus from Hellenistic Egypt. Aside from jewelry, the Tanagras display a range of other accessories that also conveyed their elite status. This woman wears a distinctive hat called a tholia, and she carries a handheld fan, and she wears fine slippers on her feet. Let's start at the top with the tholia. The tholia was a conical hat with a wide brim, apparently made of straw. The primary function of the tholia was to shade the wearer from the sun, again indicating that we should think of this figure as being outdoors. On the other hand, the advantage of wearing a tholia, rather than draping the himation over the head, is that it allowed the wearer to display her jewelry and hairstyle. As we can see from the back, this woman wears the simple chignon. This woman has elected to wear both tholia and himation, though she has carefully arranged the fabric so that her earrings are visible. Like her sister statuette, she also wears slippers and holds a fan. The fan had its origins in the exotic East, with handles made of ivory and fancy feathers, not unlike the peacock feather fans of 19th century Paris. But the Tanagras mostly hold palm-shaped fans such as this one, suggesting that they were woven out of palm fronds or straw like the tholia. And like the tholia, hand fans would have provided welcome respite from the hot Mediterranean sun. Finally, footwear. Many of the Tanagras seem to deliberately display their elegant slippers by extending one foot from beneath their chiton. But these would have been emphasized with paint in a contrasting color. We know that there was a wide range of footwear in ancient Greece, including boots, sandals, and slippers. These could be quite utilitarian or elaborately decorated. Most do not survive archaeologically, though we do have some metal sandal beds like these, which do not look comfortable. Again, one hopes that these were made for the grave and no one had to wear them in real life. In any case, whatever their form or decoration, we know that footwear had particular significance in ancient Greek society. Footwear symbolized transitions of many kinds between inside and outside, sacred and profane, virgin and bride. I will have more to say about this later, but for now, let us focus on the footwear worn by the Tanagras, which is typically shown as fancy imported persicae, or Persian slippers. Again, the Tanagras wear shoes because they are out of doors, en route to the sanctuary. They are in transition from the profane world to the sacred. Within the sanctuary, ritual activities would have included votive dedications, sacred meals, music, and dance. These would have been largely women-only events, especially at sanctuaries dedicated to goddesses who looked out for women's concerns. Aphrodite as the goddess of love, or Artemis as the protectress of pregnant women and children. The Tanagras depict such acts of devotion as women play musical instruments and dance. Within the homosocial environment of the sanctuary, women are freed from the constraints of being in the public eye, or rather, the eyes of strange men. They are able to relax their strict attention to their cosmos and let loose in the service of the goddess. This is where the malleability of the hemation is best exemplified in the so-called mantle dance, where the wearer is able to manipulate her garments to facilitate her movement, emphasized here by the fine fabric clinging to her body and dynamic folds flowing out behind her. If we think about the Tanagras as objects that were owned by women, purchased by women, dedicated by women, and perhaps even made by women, it is interesting to consider that images such as these would be considered appropriate, even desirable. They have not chosen to represent the comparatively solemn act of making a votive dedication, for example, but the exuberant dance in celebration of the goddess. Certainly, an elite woman's skill at music and dance would have been worthy of recognition. But I think it is important to recognize in the Tanagras a particular vision of femininity that is often absent from other sources, especially the male-authored literary sources. I also think it's interesting that although the Tanagras depict women wearing their finest dress, expensive jewelry, and fancy accessories, none that I know of can be securely identified as a bride. The Tanagras seem to reflect the concerns of adult women, that is, women who are already married. Of course, a woman is not considered fully adult until she has borne a child, and women's concerns surrounding pregnancy and childbirth do in fact appear among the Tanagras. I'm going to go ahead and point this out right now because I can see this very well now. That this woman is wearing a severed face veil with the eyes cut out. It's called a tigidion, and she's not wearing it over her eyes. She's pushed it back over her head. That's what's going on there, and I did not see this until now. It's a wonderful example of how when you only look at something from photographs, you miss important details that you can only see from objects when you have one, personal autopsy. The draped arrangement of ancient Greek dress means that special purpose maternity garments, such as we wear today, were unnecessary. The uncut, unsewn garments would simply be arranged to accommodate the changing body of the pregnant woman, with the result that the pregnancy might have remained imperceptible to others until quite advanced, if at all. One wonders, in fact, whether we have missed images of pregnant women in the corpus for this reason. On the other hand, even if we cannot identify this figure as pregnant, and I'm not sure that she is, again, from personal autopsy 45 minutes ago, the fact that the folds of the hemation call attention to the abdomen serves as a kind of visual referent to pregnancy and childbearing, which were essential to ideal womanhood. We do have images of women that are certainly pregnant, such as this nude statuette from Tanagras. If only we knew the fine context of this figurine, whether a tomb or a sanctuary. If a sanctuary, could it have been an appeal to the divine for assistance in achieving or maintaining a pregnancy? Or was an expecting woman asking for protection and a safe delivery? If the statuette was found in a tomb, could it represent a woman who had died in childbirth? Or a wished-for pregnancy that was not achieved in life? It is curious that the figure crosses her arms over her breasts, suggesting that lactation and nourishment of a newborn was not a focus. And I'll return to this idea momentarily. Or is this simply a gesture of modesty? I know of one other pregnant figure like this one, and she has the same gesture. The potential dangers of pregnancy and childbirth are evident in this terracotta statuette found in Smyrna, modern Izmir, that is related to the Tanagras type. Here, a pregnant woman wears a cord above her baby bump and below her breasts, in the center of which is a small indentation representing an amulet. And again, I apologize for the quality of photographs, but here's the band and the amulet right there. We know from literary sources that such amulets were commonly worn by women for protection and healing, but they are not typically shown in the visual sources. That is, they're hidden underneath their garments. In this case, we might safely assume that the woman hoped the amulet would ensure a safe delivery and healthy newborn. Certainly, modern women share these same concerns, even as childbirth is relatively safer and infant mortality much lower than it was in antiquity. We know that Artemis was the special protectress of pregnant women, and that dress played an important role in her cult. This remarkable votive relief, which is contemporary with the Tanagras, illustrates the ritual to Artemis following a successful birth. The goddess, in larger scale than her devotees, stands on the right holding her torch. To the left of her altar, a young attendant brings a sacrificial victim, perhaps a bovine, followed by a female figure holding a baby who reaches towards the goddess. So here's the baby. Behind her is another attendant holding a small jug and balancing a tray of offerings on her head. And at the far left of the frame is a woman wearing a chiton and hemation draped over her head. Unfortunately, the slab is broken at exactly this point, so we're not sure how much of her face was originally visible. She holds a small pyxis, perhaps containing incense. Above the figures hang articles of clothing, as if they're suspended from a clothesline. There's even a pair of shoes here. Although early interpretations identified this scene as the presentation of the infant to the goddess in order to secure her continued protection, I concur with Yvette Morisot that what we're looking at is a sacrifice marking the end of the mother's lying in and her ritual purification prior to her reincorporation into society as an adult. With this reading, the mother is the draped figure on the left. She's larger in scale than the other figures, who should be identified as servants. The woman holding the baby is not the mother, as had previously been assumed, but she's most likely a wet nurse. We know that new mothers dedicated articles of dress to Artemis as a thank offering to the goddess for her protection during pregnancy and childbirth. As we saw with the pregnant Tanagras wearing an amulet, we see that women managed their anxieties surrounding pregnancy and childbirth by means of dress. Again, one wishes for context. Does this image of a swaddled infant represent a wished-for child or a child who had died? Certainly, swaddling cloths or spargana served a practical function to provide warmth for the newborn child. This baby also has a little cap to keep his head warm. Although it has been suggested that spargana would have served as diapers, the reverse of this figurine from the Piraeus makes such an interpretation less secure. It seems likely that special cloths were woven specifically for use as spargana, presumably by the expectant mother. In Euripides' Ion, Creusa recognizes her grown son, whom she had abandoned as a child, by the weaving she had made as a girl. It is possible that spargana were part of the bride's trousseau, which included textiles of various types representing several years' work. Hence, swaddling not only served a practical function to provide warmth and protection for the newborn infant, they symbolized in a profound way the beginnings of the socialization of the child. The baby was literally enveloped in the most basic product of culture, created by the mother. Hence, swaddling cloths reflect the role of the newborn within the household in both a practical and a symbolic way. Images of women breastfeeding are relatively rare in ancient Greek art compared to the Italic tradition, but they do exist in the corpus of Tanagra figurines. And again, we cannot know whether such images reflect a successful birth and a healthy, well-fed infant, or the concerns of a woman who is experiencing difficulty with lactation and breastfeeding. It is also unclear whether this woman is in fact the mother of the child or a wet nurse, which would indicate the elite status of the child's family if they could afford a servant or slave to provide such a service. The health and vitality of the child, underscored by the gesture of grasping the woman's arm, may indicate, can you see that right here? May indicate that the focus should be on the baby and not the woman. Finally, this image is a wonderful illustration of the adaptability of women's dress to accommodate the needs of the child. As the baby outgrew the need to breastfeed, he or she could be cared for by an older nurse past childbearing age. In general, the elderly were not held in high esteem in ancient Greece, and depictions of older persons in art often verge on caricature. But an elderly nurse would have possessed years of child-rearing experience, and in this case a certain respect is conveyed by the woman's elegant clothing and seated position on a chair with a footstool. One might ask whether this woman should be identified as the grandmother of the child rather than the nurse. While it is possible, her physiognomy clearly indicates a woman of advanced age, whereas in ancient Greece, a woman could be a grandmother by 30. And a woman of elite status would generally be represented as eternally young, not unlike in our own culture. Indeed, the inscription on the grave relief of Amphitrite from the Kerameikos Cemetery in Athens explicitly identifies her as the grandmother of the infant child, but she is represented as a young woman. If not for the inscription, we might assume she is the mother. As the child grew older, he or she would be socialized according to masculine or feminine ideals. Just as in our own society, in which little boys are traditionally dressed in blue and girls in pink, gender was primarily constructed by means of dress. In this case, a young boy, as indicated by his physiognomy and uncut locks of curly hair, wears a hamation draped so that it drags on the ground, suggesting it's too big for him. The hamation is not itself a gendered garment. It is the way one wears it that makes it masculine or feminine. In this case, the boy wears his hamation like a grown man to indicate that he will one day achieve the ideal physique of an adult athlete. As if to underscore his future athletic prowess, he carries a ball, which nicely bridges childhood games with adult competition in the gymnasium. The ball has the added benefit of resembling an Ouroboros, the round oil flask that was an essential component of the athlete's kit, again, underscoring the inevitable transition from childhood to adulthood. We may in fact be witnessing a stage of this transition by means of ritual. The fact that the boy wears a wreath on his head indicates that he is prepared to take part in a religious rite. His dynamic pose, as if walking, suggests that he is moving towards a new stage of life. We know from textual sources that women dedicated their toys to the goddess Artemis, protector of children, as part of their coming of age. Could we be witnessing such an event? Again, if we knew the fine context of this object, we might be able to say more about its function. If it was dedicated in a sanctuary, it might have served as a reminder that the ritual had taken place, or as a substitute for a child who was unable to perform the dedication for himself. If in a grave, especially the grave of a child, it might represent a hoped-for event that had not been achieved in life. Girls also participated in religious rituals, especially for Artemis. Here we see a young girl holding a rabbit in the fold of her garment, perhaps a gift for the goddess. Artemis is a protector of animals as well as children and their mothers. Her age is indicated by her physiognomy as well as her dress. She wears a chiton folded over to shorten it, belted. Here you can see right here. Here's the very cute bunny. Belted with a thin cord beneath her undeveloped breasts. She is clearly identified as a girl who has not achieved menarche, and so is not yet of marriageable age. As an unmarried girl, she remains wild, like the rabbit, a point to which I will return shortly. If we compare the two, we see that both children are presented not as miniature adults, but as children practicing masculinity and femininity through their dress as well as their poses and gestures. Whereas the girl is relatively composed and contained by her garment like a proper woman, the boy displays his body in a more dynamic pose like an ideal athlete. And even though the girl has no need to veil in public, she nevertheless calls attention to her fine garment by holding the edge. Like a grown woman, she is already identified with woven fabric in a way the boy is not. Prior to marriage, girls were considered wild, untamed. Their relative freedom is evident from images such as this statuette group of two girls dancing, their high-belted chitones flowing behind them. But marriage can't be too far off, as their hair is bound in the low chignon of adult women. And so we have images of girls on the cusp of marriage, but none specifically identifiable as brides. Or maybe we do. This statuette of a seated girl tying her sandal is unusual, if not unique, within the corpus of Tanagra figurines. It is possible that it is not ancient, but a modern invention based on iconography that exists in other media, especially vase painting. Nevertheless, the subject is worth unpacking. Although this might seem like an ordinary scene of daily life, we have seen footwear had special significance in Greek society. We are likely witnessing some kind of transition. Perhaps this girl is fastening her sandal in preparation for the procession to the sanctuary, or perhaps she is untying her sandal. Having arrived at the sanctuary, she removes her footwear as she transitions from the profane world of the outside to the sacred space of the sanctuary, so as not to sully the ritually clean space. Her hair is bound up, which suggests that if she is in fact a girl and not an adult woman, she is on the cusp of marriage. We know that footwear was also symbolic for the Greek wedding, representing the literal and symbolic transition from the bride's natal home to that of her new husband, and from girlhood to adulthood. Ancient literary sources describe sandals and shoes as a means of feminine allure, which was essential for every young bride to achieve. Could this statuette be our missing bride? There are too many unknowns to be certain, but it's worth considering. We have seen that the corpus of Tanagras reflects the dual concerns of adult Greek women, ritual and procreation. Upon marriage, the primary task of the bride was to become pregnant and give birth to a healthy child, preferably a boy, to maintain the patrilineage. Children would be raised in part by hired nurses or slaves if the household could afford it, and socialized according to masculine and feminine ideals. Having born children, a woman achieved true adulthood and enjoyed the benefits of participating in religious rituals, especially those concerned with procreation and the protection of women and children. As we see in the Tanagras, the female body and dress were central to both procreation and ritual, by means of which the cycle of women's lives was maintained. Thank you very much.